much, and it needs to be front and center. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much. Dana, can you share what something from your group?
Sure. So we were we were chatting about the impact of systemic racism, structural oppression, how paramount it is with murdered and missing Indigenous women, how that's not front and center and historically over the years. We were chatting about how to gain tools on organizational and structural systems change with policies and practices, and it was great. It was great having the breakout. So thank you, Allison.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for everyone who shared. And so I'm just going to tell you all a little bit about PACE's connection. Then I'm going to, Porter's going to speak for a few minutes, then Jody, and then we'll have Lynette. And I'll introduce everyone. So that's going to be the format as we go. Please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat. We will have time for questions at the very end. So please do put those in if you want to share resources, thoughts. My colleague John will be monitoring the chat. So, oh, whoops, present. Okay, great. You guys can all see that. So we're PACE's Connection, and we're creating a much better normal. We're here to support communities to accelerate the use of PACE's science to solve our most intractable problems. And PACES stands for Positive and Adverse Childhood Experiences. And we have actually, I think, maybe over 53,000 members, which is amazing. Many of you are members. And if you're here today and you're not a member, it's free to join. It's just a community who cares about these issues and making a difference. So we have communities all over the world. We actually have quite a number of more international communities that need to be added. If you want to join a community, you just go to our homepage and click on the community tab, and you can search for a community in your area. We also have a really great map you can take a look at that shows where all the communities are. We also have a whole bunch of different webinars coming up, including if you want to learn about how to start a community in your area. So thank you so much. And please let us know if you have any questions that we can answer, because a whole bunch of us from PACE's Connection are here to answer those. Without further ado, Porter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Porter Jennings-McGarity. I am a community facilitator with PACE's Connection. And so I'm going to start by just kind of giving us a brief background of our major topic for today. So essentially, we're here to talk about the kind of underlying phenomena that have kind of come up in our conversation regarding the Gabby Petito case. And this case has resonated with us at PACE's Connection for several reasons. First, with it's an incident of trauma when we describe violence against women, and specifically intimate partner violence. And in addition to that, part of what we do at PACE's Connection is when we're talking about these issues that come up, such as in this case, intimate partner violence, also putting some thought into whose voice is not being involved in the conversation. And so that brought up that the case with Gabby Petito is absolutely heartbreaking. And that should also bring up another important topic, which is that of the disproportionate number of women of color that go missing. And then additionally, how their stories are not told the same way and as frequently in the media. So I think it's really important just to highlight in the beginning, and hopefully we'll talk about this later, using the conversation regarding what happens with Gabby Petito to talk about missing white woman syndrome is in no way an effort to diminish what happened to Gabby Petito at all. Both concepts and phenomena are incredibly devastating and deserve respect. But again, part of our mission at PACE's Connection to focus on inequities is to talk about whose voices are not being told in the conversation. So when we think about missing white woman syndrome, essentially this is a term that is it's been used in research, and so this isn't a term that Pace's Connection has come up with. It's also been referred to as the damsel in distress syndrome. But essentially, the missing white woman syndrome is a phrase that was attributed to being coined by a PBS reporter back in the early 2000s. And essentially, it's used to describe the overabundance of coverage that mainstream media outlets dedicate to missing persons of white women, and its correlating lack of attention to missing persons of color. And so that's the term. So why is this a problem? Why is the issue of missing white women syndrome a problem? Well, essentially, it reflects the racial disparity that's present in our criminal justice system, and specifically the disparities present in the investigation and allocation of resources to missing persons. And so there's a quote from a great recent article in the Journal of Criminology that says that left unaddressed, missing white women syndrome is a danger to all living people of color worldwide, as the possibility of being the victim of abduction or chance of disappearance exists no matter what gender or race a person is. So again, that kind of just brings this, back full circle to why this issue should be important to all of us. So just kind of to give some basic statistics, just to contextualize the conversation. When we think about missing persons in general, essentially the statistics on this is that we see that 1 in 3 women are likely to experience some sort of violence throughout their life. Or 736 million. And this is something that's increasing actually with the pandemic. So this problem is worsening. And when we think about missing persons, women are more likely to go missing than men. So if we look at it based on gender, that's kind of the difference. And then when we look on that based on ethnicity, what the most recent statistics suggest are that 54% of missing persons are white, and white people make up 76% of the population. And in contrast to that, Black people make up 31% of missing persons, but yet Black people only constitute 13% of the US population. So that just provides kind of some statistics and overviews of one type of subgroup that is disproportionately represented in the media. So that kind of provides us a little bit of background to our topic today, and I will hand it back over to Allison.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to let everyone know is that Porter, before she came to Pace's Connection, was a researcher in the field of adverse childhood experiences and criminal justice. And so it's really wonderful to have her expertise here as a staff member at Pace's Connection. And so when we're talking about positive and especially right now adverse childhood experiences, many of you are familiar with this science. Some of you maybe not so much, but ACEs have to do with different childhood experiences like neglect, abuse, different things that could happen in the family home, such as a divorce or a family member going to prison or witnessing domestic violence in the home. And the more ACEs that you have, the higher your chances of having certain public health outcomes that we look at, especially when you're looking at population. So this could be increased risk for domestic violence, or this could be increased risk of incarceration or increased risk of substance misuse. And so when we look at these issues, we're seeing, and Porter, maybe you can affirm that, when it comes to a lot of these traumas, we really focus here at Pace's Connection on historical trauma. What is the very root of why are these ACEs happening? Why are they more prevalent in certain communities? And historically, how have oppressed groups of people been the victims of violence that then increase these various health outcomes that we're looking at? And this is why it's been very important for us to tackle these types of issues here. And John or Porter, if you guys could just put the link in the chat so that folks can sign up for our historical trauma in America series. We have one coming up. And so that's kind of a little bit why that's important to us today. I'm going to introduce one of our guest speakers today. Let me find your bio, Jody. This is Jody Sanborn, and she's the Director of Prevention with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Assault. And it's really wonderful to have you here today. And she's going to give us some background on what types of issues are important in Wyoming. What do we need to know? What do we need to be thinking about? Thank you so much, Jody.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you everyone with PACES and everyone who is on the call today. Like Allison said, my name is Jody Sanborn, and I'm the Director of Prevention with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And today I am joining you from what is now known as Banner, Wyoming. And it's important that I take the time to acknowledge that I am on the rightful land of the Apsaloka, or the Crow people, which is a mistranslation of their name. But I just want to acknowledge that it's here where these people engaged in relationship, Indigenous way of life, and ceremony with many other tribal nations, including the Shoshone, the Cheyenne, the Lakota, and the Arapaho. Also, I want to say that we acknowledge that these lands were forcefully stolen from these people by people who look like me, many settler colonizers, for the purposes of persecution and genocide. So our organization, the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, acknowledges and is constantly seeking to understand the harm that has been created and continues to this day through our participation in colonialism, racism, and oppression, as well as with all the intersections of violence. So I know that words are not enough to repair the harm, but we are committed to providing land acknowledgements, as we feel that it is just one piece of holding ourselves accountable to undoing the harm through our commitment to anti-oppression work. So with that, I would like to just kind of transition a little bit into what it is that Allison has specifically asked for me to come and speak to you all on. And that's really looking at this bigger picture of the Gabby Petito case and, missing white woman syndrome and domestic violence. And I feel that with Lynette being on this session today with us, I think that I'm going to let her speak to the reality of missing and murdered Indigenous people and women and girls in the state of Wyoming, but that I could speak a little bit about domestic violence and just kind of provide a call to action about what we can do as a society as we're addressing these topics. So first, I guess I just like to acknowledge that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and this is really a national push to acknowledge and commit to seeing a culture change where we all feel safe and empowered and free from domestic violence. And there are a lot of really great tools and resources that folks who are interested in learning about, like specifically how they can do that, what are the tangible things that we can do as part of this awareness month. Lots of resources that I can link to in the chat a little bit later on for those folks who are interested, but really acknowledging that there are great folks out there who are looking at this through an intersectional lens, which is really important for, the work that we're doing and what we're talking about today, especially when we know that anyone can experience domestic violence, but folks who identify as BIPOC or LGBTQ+, or live at the intersections of multiple identities experience rates at a much higher, they experience these at a much higher rate. So most of what we hear about and think about to be true for domestic violence is just the tip of the iceberg. I don't feel like I need to go into a domestic violence 101 kind of conversation with you all today, but it's important that we acknowledge, especially when we're thinking about, what have we heard and seen about, the Gabby Petito case, or what do we think about when we first hear domestic violence, that a lot of that is just the tip of the iceberg. And, there's probably no one true thing that could have been done or put into place to stop that situation. There are a lot of things that lie kind of underneath the surface of the water, thinking back to that tip of the iceberg analogy. So domestic violence, it really includes many, many things. It's really a pattern of power and control that's perpetrated by one person over another. It can be physical violence, sexual violence. There can be threats, emotional abuse, economic abuse, all sorts of things that we see there showing up as what we qualify as domestic violence. But I really don't want to take up a ton of space with just talking about what that looks like. Other than to say what I already said, it affects everyone, or it can affect everyone. And we know here in the state of Wyoming, we have extremely high rates of domestic violence. We currently know that in the state of Wyoming, according to a survey that was done by the Wyoming Women's Council, that domestic violence was one of the top 3 issues most commonly perceived as a serious problem for Wyoming women. And of those women who participated in that survey, we know that about 1 out of 5 identified as a domestic violence victim themselves. Just thinking largely about domestic violence, we know that about 1 in 5 women and 1 in 4 men 1 in 5 women and 1 in 14 men will experience sexual violence, and 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men will experience some form of domestic violence, sexual violence, or stalking perpetrated by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So the point of me saying all of this is that it happens, and it happens at extremely high rates. And we know that, folks who are, like I mentioned before, BIPOC or living at intersections of multiple identities experience it even higher. So to kind of just really quickly run through all of this and wrap it up before we turn it over to Lynette to talk about, what we really came here for, I just wanted to provide kind of a call to action for folks on, what do we do about this? How do we address this? And for those of you who work in the public health field, you're probably familiar with the river of change analogy, where we talk about how if we're truly going to end violence or end our public health topic of interest, we have to move upstream. There is a place for folks who are standing there, who are rescuing folks from the edges of the stream who need our assistance. But if we're truly going to end these things, we have to move upstream and find out what is causing these issues or problems in the first place. And so as we're thinking about our topic for today, I just want to highlight that it's really important that we do this moving upstream through an anti-oppression lens that really centers those who are the most marginalized. Because we know that if we focus our efforts on those folks who are most marginalized, who are the least likely to be seen or heard or receive services or assistance, then we can reach everyone. So I guess I would just like to say thank you to Allison and PACES for the opportunity to just briefly hop in and talk about domestic violence in Wyoming. And I can be in the chat and answer questions or follow up throughout. So I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jody. And I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing in Wyoming. One thing that I had meant to say at the beginning is that as a white woman, it's been important to make sure that we're lifting up the voices of people of color, Indigenous, Black people, and other voices. And that also we don't want to just leave it to people of color and other marginalized groups to be the ones to have to carry this whole weight. And that as white people, we also need to be doing the work. And so it's so encouraging, Jody, to know that such a kind and intelligent and social justice minded person as you is doing this amazing work in Wyoming. And I just want to say thank you. It's very inspiring to learn about. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Lynette, and it's an honor to have Lynette here today. If you read the NPR piece that we linked to, Lynette was quoted. Lynette Grable is Northern Arapaho, Hunkpapa Lakota. She's an advocate, trainer, tribal liaison, and consultant. She's the director and founder of Not Our Native Daughters, and I'll put the link to that in the chat. She's been an advocate for over 10 years, and I'll let Lynette speak about your work and maybe some issues that we need to keep in mind. Thank you so much, Lynette.
Yes, thank you so much, Allison and Paces, for having me. Also, thank you, Jody, for the acknowledgement and the words that you shared, and also what Porter, I think it was so valuable, and the things that you had mentioned. So thank you for that as well. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynette Grable. I reside here at Wind River Reservation here in Wyoming. I have been advocating for Indian country for about 13, 14 years now. The heart and soul of Not Our Native Daughters, and the reason why I started Not Our Native Daughters back in 2013 was to bring awareness on the missing, murdered, and exploited missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I like what was stated before. I tend to focus more on Indigenous women and children, only because the statistics back up the reasoning for focusing on those. I get a lot of responses, even from my own community, you have to include men. Well, I do include men when it comes to any type of statistics. And of course, on the issue, most people know that MMIW also relates to anybody who's Indigenous who is missing or murdered. But statistically, Indigenous women has the worst statistics in the nation, and just about every statistic that is out there. One of the things that I always say, and I'm quoted a lot on, but it's really the truth, and I say it, not to elicit guilt, but to bring the impact of the issue of Indigenous women and children, and that is, I usually say this in person, but I stand before you, a full-blooded Native American woman. But the statistics that hang over my head is that I am the most stalked, raped, assaulted, suffered violence, even domestic violence, higher than any other ethnicities in this country. And when I started Not Our Native Daughters back in 2013, those statistics were the same. So not much has transpired from that time when I started Not Our Native Daughters for the education of these issues for Indigenous women. But here we are in 2021, and these issues and these statistics are still the same, and if not worse. And for most of I go from one interview to one training to another these past 2 weeks, ever since the Gabby Petito's case. And yes, my heart, my prayers, and my thoughts are with the Petito family. It's unfortunate what happened to them, and I know they're in a place of mourning and grief. I know, how that feels, because I sit with a lot of families that are suffering and still going through the MMIW issue, but don't have any type of response, as we've seen in comparison to the Gabby Petito case. And let me just say, the Gabby Petito case is exactly how it's supposed to be. Everybody on deck, all the search and rescue come on board. There was other search and rescues and law enforcement that came from surrounding states. Everybody came to the show. And also media, not only did we have statewide and local media that was present, but we had national and even worldwide media that is still involved into this case. And so, not to take anything away from her family, but I'm grateful for discussions like this, and for other allies and people who work on this issue on marginalized groups, that they understand the contrast. The contrast here is that when a person of color in our country goes missing, there's lack of response, there's lack of effort, there's lack of urgency. Right now in the Wind River community that I reside in June 29th, a 14-year-old girl went missing in our community, and she's still yet to have statewide attention. She's still yet to have even local attention. Her name is Cameron Hill. She's 14 years old. She was last seen in Colorado, but yet not many people are talking about it. And this is a child. So you take a 14-year-old girl child in comparison to, Gabby Petito, and you could see the resemblance of what is important to this country and what is not important. Unfortunately, due to, our historical traumas in this country, I have done a lot of work in historical trauma. I do a presentation called Historical Trauma, Past Trauma to Present Day Trauma. I do believe our Indigenous Indigenous communities still suffer from the passed down trauma, the associate trauma, the historical trauma that still resides within us as people, but also trying to promote healing from the traumas that we've endured. One of the things I always say is I've never went to boarding school, but my father did. And I never had to experience the atrocities that happened during the boarding school era, but I suffered the passed down trauma and the associate trauma that my father never had a chance to really process or probably even deal with from a childhood to an adult. And so I focus a lot on trauma. I do a lot of trauma informed care. I train on ACEs as well. So I'm glad to hear of the work of PACEs. Definitely a strong advocate for ACEs. I've been working on trying to get a project off the ground, actually focusing on tribal ACEs for children and just focusing on statistics just for tribal communities for just Native children. And that's been a long year in process, but I have some, we're still trying to work on it and still trying to get it funded. But I do believe, we always talk about what's the root. What is the root of the problem? Well, there's certain factors that stem the issues of when a Indigenous or a person of color goes missing or murdered, and the response to that. And this is a topic that nobody wants to talk about and nobody wants to highlight and people want to steer away from. And the root of it all is discrimination. The root of it all is racism, and we have to start having these discussions in order to start undoing racism, not to elicit guilt, not to place blame. And, the same thing with the Gabby Petito case. I'm not here to place blame on law enforcement or search and rescue teams or even media. I'm only here to outline the problem and how can we come and move forward to resolve the issues when somebody goes missing, especially a person of color. The statistics and the history is there. And just think about it for just one moment. For the last 3 people or the last women in our country that went missing, just the last 3, maybe the last 5 and even 10. Has any of them looked like me? Not one. Not one a Native American woman have you seen on a nationwide or even global media outlet that look like me? But yet we suffer these statistics that make us vulnerable to being either missing, murdered, or exploited. So where do we go from here? I like to present the problem, but I also like to present a call of action. How do we move forward from this? And how do we come together? So again, it just goes back to that discrimination and undoing racism conversation. How do we do that and how do we promote that? Most people don't understand, I reside in the Northern Plains regions. My tribes are from Northern Plains tribes. And so, for us here in Wyoming, the Dakotas, Montana, Nebraska region, the Northern Plains region, it's a lot different than the East Coast or even down south or even, on the West Coast. We suffer discrimination and racism on a regular basis. For us here in our community, and I know very well my family in North and South Dakota, racism and discrimination is a daily thing. If I go to the store, a white person's not going to be followed, but I most possibly will be followed as if I'm going to steal something. So again, I point this out to say that here for us in the Northern Plains region, we have a lot of work to do collectively. And it takes a lot of allies. It takes other people to come on board to create those conversations and then create how do we move forward and how do we build partnerships and collaboration and to move forward. For 3 in 4 Native American women suffer violence at some point in their life, whether it's from childhood to an adulthood. And 70% of violent crimes inflicted on Indigenous women are from non-Native perpetrators. When I talk about the crimes and violence against Indigenous women, especially on social media, a lot of the flack I get back is, well, it's your own men that beat you up. It's your own people. But 70% will tell you that they are non-Native perpetrators who inflict this violence upon us. you know, as the mother of 3 children, I like to believe that if my child goes missing, that I live in a society, in a state, in a nation that would come to a response and do something about it. And I know very well, just like the other mothers and the people in my community, you know, in Indian country, nationwide, we understand that people just don't care. That our issues are constantly put on the back burner. And it's not just MMIW. You could pick any issue we face in Indian country and it's put on the back burner. People do not hear about it. You know, whether it's related to our poverty or extreme poverty, whether it's in regards to our children, the faces our children face, you know, our lack of public safety, whether it's with law enforcement, and just it goes on and on and on. One of the things I always say is if we're going to talk about MMIW, then we need to talk about all the correlating issues that is a factor of MMIW, and all those play a role, including our historical trauma. Now, I've been in flux with so many different interviews, both nationwide, worldwide, about this Gabby Petito case, and how do I feel as an Indigenous woman to see so much attention on a white woman's case versus the cases that I know very well that are still present, still women that are, or children that are missing, you know, and I've been asked that question a lot, and it's really hard to kind of put those in words because it's more of a feeling that I feel, you know, when I understand that, and I have to explain to my children that we live in a world or a society who doesn't care about Indigenous people, and that we have to take extra precautions to as a result of safety and how we live and coincide in this world, especially in the realm of discrimination. You know, as a mother, I think about all these things, not only for my children though, but also for my Native community as well. You know, and so, you know, I say that to say is that, you know, I don't know what the definite answer into resolving this, but I do know that we have to start by having conversations, and a meeting and a training like this is a first step, because I do believe people like yourselves and PACES and the other organizations or advocates that may be listening to me is that we do have the hearts and minds to change this. We do have the know-how to build, you know, the coalition and collaboration to make these changes, maybe in just a small way, but it can resolve into a bigger way. You know, I shared a statistic in the beginning of my speech, and I said that I am the most stalked, raped, murdered, and sexually assaulted and suffered domestic violence than any other woman in this nation. But I say that because I want to, I hope and pray that at the end of my life or at the end of my work, those statistics have changed. And like I said, those statistics have been present since 2010. Not much has changed. And not only that, we're as advocates for people who advocate for Indian country or advocate for, you know, sexual assault or domestic violence for us here in Indian country, we're only beginning to talk about this now only because a white woman went missing. Only because a white woman went missing are we're beginning to start to have these conversations on a bigger scale, and more people are wanting to know how they can get involved. And it shouldn't have to be this way. You know, it shouldn't have to take a case of somebody who's not even from our community to start having these conversations and start having the media attention that is needed for the issue. But you know, I say all of that to promote the change, to promote the collaboration, to promote the willingness. I am very optimistic. I do believe that a lot of us who will do the work, especially in research and data, can begin to gather some more data and research, begin to do more of the work that is needed to support the issue so that we can start getting funding to do the work, When I started Not Our Native Daughters in 2013, I partnered with a lot of universities, even with Mrs. Cindy McCain, prominent people, and we went for grants to try to focus on the issue of the violence and the victimization against Indigenous women. And one after another, we have been denied for grants. And it was because we lacked data and research. We lacked the numbers to support what we were trying to go after. So I do believe, I'm a big advocate for data and research. I'm working on some stuff to pull out some more data and research for not only Indigenous women, but for children. And I also want to move forward to build with others to see how we can make these changes. One of the things I realized, we are Domestic Violence Month, and I am a domestic violence survivor. I'm also a sexually assault survivor. I'm also a rape survivor. So the statistics that is present for Native American women, most of them I have suffered from and overcame, and began to move on to try to heal with not only with my own community, but just promote healing on a wider scale. But there's 574 tribes in the US. So that means there's 574 different tribal nations with different, beliefs, rituals, ceremonies, traditions. There's 574 of them, but only 58 of those tribes has a domestic violence shelter. Only 58 of those 574 tribes, only 58 has a domestic violence shelter. But yet we suffer domestic violence 50 times higher than a national average. And some murder rates for some regions in our nation, Native American women suffer murder rates 10 times higher than other places. So we have a lot to work to do. But one thing I always say is I'd be a fool, or anybody would be a fool, to think that we can do it alone. I definitely need the help. I definitely need the collaboration. I definitely need people who have the understanding and also wants to work, because it correlates with the issue, wants to work towards undoing racism. And how do we do that? I think I took it a lot of time, and I do want to save some time for some questioning. But I do thank you for taking the time to listen to me. And one last thing I want to mention, though, is when we talk about white women syndrome, people, it's a big debate. Is this an issue? Is this real? And I like that it was mentioned earlier that it was actually research. This is actually a thing. And again, this goes back to just undoing what is out there and how can we change that. And so I would like to see more people do the work in discussing this. So I just thank you for this opportunity to giving me a voice, especially for us here in Indian country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynette. Thank you for your vulnerability, your honesty, your calls to action, your, speaking of such powerful truths. All of us here are here because we want to make a difference and we want to take action, and we are here with you and for you. And so, we did have, so just if any of you have questions, if you could just go ahead and drop them in the chat. But one thing I want to ask Dana, because Dana is the community manager for our Indigenous nations and peoples community at Paces Connection, whether or not you have for those of you, the link is in the chat. If you could join that community, just if you have anything where people could take action, Dana. And then I also wanted to say, Lynette, that if you're working on the ACEs issues, we want to be a part of that. So let's, Dana will connect with you after this, and let's figure out how to get more funding, more, let's, we absolutely want to be a part and support that. And I think a lot of people on this call do as well. So Dana.
Well, thank you so much, Allison. And thank you so much, Lynette and Jody and Porter, for what everyone shared. Lynette, I want to connect you with Karen Kolb. She's Payum Kawichum on the Rincon Reservation. She's actually modified the ACE questionnaire to be indigenized. So boarding school, genocide, et cetera. I know, right, Anna? I totally agree. So I want to connect you with her. And then I did put in the chat, I've been blessed to become an ally since 2017 with some of the tribes here in San Diego County, and we are working on a decolonization model. So I would love to chat with you and just get 15 minutes or something at your convenience and introduce you to Dr. Anthony Pico, former chairman of 26 years of the Viejas Band of Mission of Kumeyaay Nation, and then Amy Admire, who Payum Kawicham, also from the Rincon tribe. We're all working very collaboratively in a decolonization model of starting with parenting education and really helping the children. So I'd love to hear more about the work you're getting off the ground and connect you with some hearts down here in San Diego County. But very grateful that you're here today.
Thank you so much, Dana.
Mhm.
So Ana Nunes, you had a question and then some comments. So if you don't mind sharing, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
I don't know. I had so many. Which ones are you referring to? I think they actually covered it.
Great. You had asked a question about, do you think they are not reported? And that is why.
You feel that they're underreported. Thank you for. Do you think that the reason we don't have statistics on the males is because they're underreported? And for, sometimes people say, oh, they're men and they just wander off and, so they'll come back, leave them alone type of attitude that they'll go underreported. Because I personally have known people that went missing that were male and we could not find. And unfortunately, when we did find them, they had passed on, and that was from Absaluga Nation, that was from the Crow Nation. And so those things are happening and they're underrepresented. And I feel that we shouldn't, just because statistics, we're a nation and the Indigenous, we go word of mouth. That's our statistics because nobody's doing the statistics for us. And I'm here in California. So you hear of all the atrocities that go on in the media, and some still are underrepresented because I'm also of Mexican American descent and an Indian nation, Apache nation. So something needs to change, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I think PACES is the first that has even touched on this. I mean, they do cultural sensitivity and stuff like that, but this is by far a very, dear to the heart. Also, and so we need to represent our men out there too that are missing.
Just to kind of answer or just respond to your question, I think all Indigenous persons go underreported,
Yes.
Not just the males, but the women and the children.
Yes,
that was the whole focus
absolutely.
That was the whole purpose of me starting our Native Daughters. And, most people in Indian country realize and understand that when we say MMIW, we still mean every single person. We are not just pushing away male Indigenous persons. I know for us here in Wyoming, I worked on the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons report that we did in 2019 and part of last year too, and was released in the beginning of January of this year. And we pulled numbers for both Indigenous persons, women, and children. So for us in Indian country, we say it as a whole, but MMIW is the one that got the acronym. We're doing this work before MMIW was even developed. And so, but Indigenous women do have the highest statistics and have the worst statistics in the nation, not just in comparison to murdered and missing persons, but just everything else. Native American women, Native American women, single mothers are the poorest. Native American women have the lowest pay rate in the nation. Native American women have the highest rates of unemployment. I mean, you can go on and on and on. And then the statistics for Indigenous women are the worst. Not to downplay anything for Indigenous men, but for us in Indian country, when we say MMIW, we mean everybody, even children. So that's I just wanted to answer that portion of your question. But underrepresented is definitely for all of us, for every single person in the tribal communities. And I do believe PACES I concur what you stated, Anna. I mean, I do believe they're spearheading on something that needs to be on a wider scale. And I do see that this can be something bigger moving forward to get other people involved and other people understanding, because people stay in ignorance because they don't get educated, or they don't want to learn the issue, or they don't want to feel guilty. They don't want to feel like they want to be shamed, or like, oh, it's my people. They don't want to feel that. So they don't want to have
we call it denial. We call it denial.
Right.
It hurts,
right.
For whatever reason.
But I'll tell this. I'll tell this to the white people here on this meeting, is that I can't tell you how good it feels for me as an Indigenous woman to hear other allies and other advocates that are not Native say, I understand what you're going through, and I want to stand with you, and I want to work with you, and how can we solve this, and say, let's get boots on the ground and try to change this. I can't tell you how good that makes me feel as an advocate, and even as a professional, but just as an Indigenous person, as well.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Lynette. Jody, do you want to just say what you put in the chat there?
Sure. I was just mentioning a follow-up from one of Porter's resources that here at the Wyoming Coalition, we receive federal funding that allows us to work in partnership with the tribes on the reservation. And that work, it's community-led and driven. And so, we don't go in as a bunch of white people and say, hey, this is what we want to do. Instead, we really look to the strengths and knowledge from the people who live in those communities. But some of that we're doing is, like starting with acknowledging our role in historical trauma and white supremacy culture, and, offering what we can to support Native-led projects. We provide funding and support for community-based initiatives. There's a project specific to Native communities called Safe Stars, which are like forensic nurse examiners that are tribal members and specifically trained in Native tradition and practice and healing. So we help support that. We have a legal project that specifically works in tribal court to provide legal advocacy and support. We look at, healing services that are rooted in traditional ways of being and approaches and practices, instead of looking at what mainstream white criminal legal justice systems based responses. Some folks don't want that for a lot of really good reasons. And just, provide other resources and policy advocacy. So, we're continuing to grow and to learn and offer support in the ways that we can as an organization.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jody. And it's really nice to hear that it's oftentimes as white people doing this work, especially those of us like in public health, there's a whole thing about cultural humility, and we can't just go in and tell people what to do. And it's wonderful to know that this is work that's centered on Indigenous voices and Indigenous leaders. So thank you so much. So we're at the hour. This is a very deep and weighty topic that we could probably spend many more hours discussing. But we are going to wind down. I'll just take a couple closing words before we close out. Thank you for staying a few minutes later. We had a very full room today, and what I noticed was that people were listening. It was one of our quieter chat sections, and people were here to listen and learn. And I just want to say thank you so much. We have a whole room full of people here who are working on educating, working on opening our hearts and our minds and overcoming that ignorance, and especially overcoming despair. Sometimes these issues can feel too hard to touch. I want to say thank you all for opening your hearts and holding space for this grief, because it is intense. And I hope that you all take good care of yourselves today, and that you take a minute to shake it out. Shaking is actually a known benefit, like good thing that you can do for yourself after feeling something really intense. So take a few minutes to shake, take a few minutes today to move your bodies, go for a walk, really, really take care of yourselves, because when we hold space for grief from violence, and especially against oppressed groups, and especially here in the United States, when it's a result of legacies and hundreds of years of genocide, this is weighty. This does impact our bodies and our minds and our hearts. So please take time to take care of yourself and let yourself feel whatever comes up. If you need to reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm feeling a lot of grief, can I talk? Please do that as well. Please join our Indigenous community on PACES Connection to be an ally. And I'll just take a couple closing words. I wanted to say thank you first and foremost to Porter. Porter was the one that had the idea for this event. This event would not be happening today without Porter. Thank you so, so much. Any closing words, Porter, and then we'll do Lynette, and then we'll do, if maybe did Jody pop off? So Porter, John, Lynette, any closing words?
Yes, just thank you all so much for being in attendance. Thank you so much, Allison, for facilitating and for all of our guest speakers. And yeah, just as a closing, to keep in mind and kind of summarize what action steps are if anybody feels empowered after this conversation to take action. And that can be a couple of different ways. One, being involved through PACES Connection with our various communities, and also as well as taking legislative action at the local, state, and community level. So thank you all so much for being here today.
Thanks, Porter. John and Lynette. John?
Oh, I just wanted to thank Lynette. Thank you so much. And yeah, I just wanted to say I'm just so grateful. Thank you.
Lynette?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity and the space to, share a few words. Of course, like you stated, Allison, this can go much more further and much more deeper. But I just want to also just kind of reflect on some action steps that I'm working on presently. I am working on something to create some type of act or some type of possibly it might evolve into a federal legislation to where the search and rescue and law enforcement response to people of color who go missing to be some type of action step that law enforcement, search and rescue have to follow, like a protocol, so that when people of color, not just Indigenous people, but also our African, also in connection with our African American and Hispanic communities, when we go missing, there's actually some kind of protocols and step that we get the equality in response. And so that's something that I'm working on with others. If anybody's interested, it's still in the infant stages, but that's something when I talk about issues, I like to work on a resolve, not just talk about what the issue is. Resolve is just as important as speaking about the issue. And that's kind of like where I'm at right now, is trying to work on a bigger scale of things on how to resolve it. But thank you so much for the influx of thank yous. I really appreciate this time, and hopefully we all can connect again. Thank you so much, and God bless you wherever you may go.
Thank you so much, Lynette. So yeah, just again, if you want to save the chat, just click on the 3 dots, save that chat. We will be posting this video, and you all, since you registered, you will be getting that email. So Lynette, I invite you to join our website, and you can make posts anytime you want, or you could email me or Dana or Porter, and we'll post stuff for you. We have 53,000 members who want to do this work. And so, we want to help you get funding. We want to help connect you with other organizations. And Dana is definitely going to be a part of that help support. So, if you have a big initiative or you're launching something, you can just actually log on our website, click post, and we'll go up on our website so that's available for everyone to see. And we'll go out in our newsletter that has about, I think, 40,000 subscribers that my colleague Raphael runs here. So this is a great network to build a coalition. So I just want to make sure you know that you can do that. Yeah, please visit the website. And anyway, thank you all so much, and take good care of yourselves today, all of you. Thank you.